Thank you to the ABTT for inviting us here. If there is a positive side to COVID, is that there are so many of you joining us today from every corner of the British Isles and beyond. This seminar will divide into two parts. The second one starts at 10:45, looking at the future of LED. But first, we're starting with looking at how we might improve the working conditions for everyone who works in light. The panel are all members of the ALD, but let me be clear, the ALD is keen to serve everyone working in light, and that includes video projection, and it's not just for designers, but technicians too. We have a stunning panel with a wide range of experience, and I'd like to introduce you to them. We have David Ayton, who is the ALD professional rep, specifically for those who are not designers. David is a freelance lighting programmer working in theatre and opera, formerly deputy head of lighting and programmer at Hampstead Theatre before going freelance in 2016. Recently programming shows at the ROH, Linbury, the West End, the Old Vic, and the recent tour of Warhorse. He's also a console trainer for ETC and a programming mentor at Guildhall and Central. With him is Stuart Porter, who until recently was the ALD professional rep and is now the ALD corporate rep. Stuart trained on the City and Guilds 181 Theatre Electricians course run by the ABTT, was a follow spot operator in the West End before working full-time in the West End and at Drury Lane particularly, where he became the first house technician to be trained as a very light technician. He went on to become a freelance lighting technician and moving light programmer on many big musicals and the Royal Tournament, as well as relighting and working as an associate LD. Stuart is now the key account manager for theatre hires at White Light. With us also is Robbie Butler. Robbie graduated from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in 2015. Since then, as a technician, he's worked regularly in the West End and toured internationally with Cirque du Soleil. He now works as a freelance lighting designer. He's lit shows all over the country, and he was a leading force behind the Save Stage Lighting campaign in 2018. And he currently sits as the chair of the Directors and Designers Committee at Equity. Leading the group who've been working on this initiative is the award-winning LD Lucy Carter, who is the ALD's professional designer rep. Lucy studied dance and drama at university and came to lighting design through lighting her own choreographies. After graduating from Roehampton, Lucy did a one-year specialism at Central in lighting design. Her first job was at the Place, first as a casual and then as chief electrician. She went on touring with dance companies and designing for them. And now she lights opera, drama, musical theatre and ballet, both throughout the UK and worldwide. Now, none of the new ALD initiatives would have happened without the dynamic force of the ALD's chair, Johanna Town. Jo started in amateur theatre, and while she was still at school, she progressed to the end of the North Pier in Blackpool as a follow spot operator. She joined the Royal Exchange as an ABTT apprentice, later gaining a full-time job there. She progressed to chief electrician at the Everyman in Liverpool, amongst other places, and was an outstanding head of lighting at London's legendary Royal Court. Since 2008, she's been a much sought after freelance lighting designer working in drama and opera, particularly at the NT, RSC and London's West End, across the UK, in Europe and the USA. Like Jo, I started in amateur theatre, joining the NYT in 1972, who later gave me my first job at the Shaw Theatre, where I cut my teeth in lighting design. I went on to be a chief electrician in London before joining Robert Ryan's lighting crew at Glyndebourne in 1978. This summer job allowed me to pursue my winter career as well in the Alps, in winter sports. In 1993 until 2003, I was at the National Theatre as head of lighting and technical manager, and I then went freelance, and I like drama, opera, musicals, ballet, and anything people would give me to do, really. But like most of us, I've now lost all my work for the time being, but this has given me more time to work as the deputy chair of the ALD. And finally, we have Rob Halliday, who started doing lighting at school, then joined the National Youth Theatre. He started touring around the world with the English Shakespeare Company and got to see a lot of theatres, a lot of crews and a lot of cities. He says he fell into programming in about 1993, working with David Hersey and others. And in between that, he'd do bits of lighting design. And between all of that, he started writing about shows for LSI and other trade publications. All of those things let him play with the latest technology, while still loving and writing about classic technology and ultimately working to preserve our ability to use older technology through his work in making the EU understand our particular requirements. He says a two-word summary might be futurist historian. My one-word summary would be guru. Well, that's your panel. They're each going to talk for a bit, and after that, we'll take your questions, which you can send to us via the panel question option. And first on is our chair from the ALD, Johanna Town. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thank you for being with us this morning. Great to have you all here. As Marco says, I am the chair of the ALD and I've been in this role for just about 3 years. I wanted to open up the ALD doors to all lighting practitioners and make it an association everybody wanted to join. I'm a lighting designer, but as Marco said, I've been head of lighting for 30 years. And my outlook on lighting, on the lighting industry, has always been about working together and making art together as a team. In my first year, the ALD realised that the effect of the EU regulations on lighting were going to have a huge effect on the future of stage lighting if implemented straight away. And it was important for to bring the whole industry together, as we could all see how bleak the future of lighting might be without good LED lighting in place. But more on that later. This was shortly followed by the campaign that joined the SPTD and the ALD and the ASD together, along with Equity and BEC2, to promote the value of design and to ask our members what they wanted and how they saw their working practice develop. We needed to change the fundamental way that we are seen in the industry and how this could change. This has led to our association to develop good codes of practice from both sides, ourselves and the producers, and to create guidance for our members, which Lucy is going to discuss shortly. Today, we find ourselves in one of the biggest crises any of us have seen in our lifetimes. Theatre has gone through recessions before. World War II caused lockdowns in London's nightlife, closing theatres, but we have never seen an event like this in the UK or across the world. And this is the time we have to stand together to find ways to resolve ways out of this crisis. I truly believe there has never been a more important time to be in an association or a union. We have come together and collaborate for the better good. It's critical, whether you are a designer or a technician, that we must have a stronger voice as theatre makers as we emerge from this world event. Collaboration and connection, to imagine new ways of working and producing work. Live entertainment will come back and will recover. It's in our blood, and it's actually in our audience's blood too. People want to be entertained. However, live theatre and performance could look very different in the future, and now's the time for us all to imagine a cleaner, more sustainable future with fairer environments for us all to work in, better pay and equality, and to put financial systems in place so that we are better protected in the future. For me, this discussion today is really important. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to help improve our world and our futures and to make live performance stronger and more sustainable. So during this session, do tell us what you want and what you need, and maybe we can all make those changes together. Sorry, that sounded a little bit like a speech, but I just think us working together and coming together is one of the most important things this crisis has allowed to happen. So let's all keep talking. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Now, Lucy, tell us a bit about what we've been doing before COVID and more intensely during COVID.
Okay, this is going to sound like a speech because the only way I could cope with doing it is writing it down, I'm afraid. Before the coronavirus hit us like a ton of bricks, we at the ALD were developing some new documents that are intended to assist our members to request and insist on better terms and conditions in their working lives. And we realised at that point that we also needed to help producers understand why we were recommending that our members request these things. So we began with two documents, the Producer's Guide to Working with ALD Members and the ALD Code of Professional Working Practice that our members have to adhere to be a member. Thereby, the Code of Professional Working Practice, we as members of the ALD have high professional standards, and producers will know that by employing an ALD member, they will be getting a high professional service. These standards are quite simple. We're going to put them in the chat, this document in the chat for you. They cover punctual attendance at all relevant moments, lost my place, and all relevant moments, and the prior agreed times during the pre-production and during Tech Week. It covers our manner of conduct to treat everybody involved on the production with dignity and respect and with confidentiality, and that we honour all elements of our contracts to a high professional standard. The producer's guide, in turn, helps a producer understand what we require of them in order to deliver these high professional standards. This is a guide and not a list of demands. And actually, the producers we worked with were very supportive and interested to learn about the things we felt were necessary. For example, the producer's guide recommends that producers embrace the principles of the PIPA Best Practice Charter, that's parents and carers in performing arts, and to consider the issues of sustainability and use the Green Code of Practice, that's the ALD Green Code of Practice, to reduce the environmental impact of the production. It also addresses the safety, well-being and health of everyone by setting out best working practices, hours of work, working conditions, schedules, necessary personnel, accommodation, travel, subsistence, billing, credits, photography and recording rights. We basically suggest good models and best working practice that basically leads to a contented and respected workforce. These two documents were written in consultation with our members and with a group of producers who have had a considerable amount of relevant input into them. Alongside these two documents, we have updated what was previously known as our contract rider. We felt it important for all our member categories that we represent at the ALD that there was guidance for them available to negotiate legally binding and fair contracts with producers. We felt it important that producers employing all members of the production teams should be issuing written confirmation of employment by way of protection, mutual protection, by way of mutual protection. It has come to light since everybody's work was immediately cancelled at the start of COVID-19 that many members of our lighting team do not have written contracts or even letters of agreement with producers. In particular, we heard from production electricians, programmers and lighting technicians that they were not paid for work that they were imminently due to start and that they had nothing in writing for the job, so they were therefore not able to claim the money. We had to rely on producers to do the right thing, and some didn't. So we will be launching tomorrow at our AGM, our ALD's AGM, 5 new documents. They've got wordy titles, I'm afraid. A new and updated lighting designer's contract checklist, a video designer's contract checklist, a production electrician's deal memo checklist, a programmer's contract stroke deal memo checklist, and a lighting technician's deal memo stroke letter of agreement checklist. We have called them and developed them as checklists and not pro forma contracts. They should be used to base a conversation and negotiation on with producers. They outline basic and suggested terms which should be included in a written agreement. Going forward, we are suggesting that as a minimum, everyone the producer employs gets something in writing. And I think the new R35, which is coming into force that the government is introducing as standard, will insist on this anyway. But I think Stuart and David might talk about that. We cannot have members of the lighting and video teams engaged via a phone conversation with a production manager that never gets confirmed and consolidated into writing, because then our members are not protected and respected. So we will be asking our members to start insisting on written deal memos, contracts, or letter of agreements. We will be publicising this and reaching out to producers and production managers to explain the necessity for this as standard good practice. We offer these checklists as a tool to assist our members to make sure they are covered for what they need and what is relevant to each job. Some of these terms and conditions will not be relevant. Some our members will be able to insist on, some will not be needed. But we hope that if each thing in our checklist is at least discussed with the producers, our members will know what they are asking for. Our members will know they are asking for fairer terms as possible. Now I've lost my place again. Our members will know that they are not alone in asking for these basic terms, and that producers will become aware that they should be addressing these issues. Briefly as possible, for example, a few of these suggested elements listed for a lighting technician are that a day rate is agreed, a payment schedule is agreed, dates of attendance are agreed in advance, travel and rest days should be agreed. We think it should be standard, but also stated in writing that days will not exceed 13 hours of work, to include 2-hour meal breaks, that they should have an 11-hour break, and any additional or extended working hours should be paid for, or at least agreed in writing in advance. It should be detailed in writing who is responsible for first aid, good quality access equipment, and who is responsible for insurance of personal possessions, personal injury and travel. I could go on, but I won't, because it will take forever. But some of those you'll see are just basic things, but they need to be in writing. The main message is that good working practice is not always being followed within our industry for the engagement and working lives of our members, and we as a community need to force a change by having one voice and asking the same questions. As the ALD professional rep and the lead on the professional working practice group, I'm excited we have finally finished these documents, but even more excited that our members can confidently ask for fair terms and conditions moving forward. Equally, I'm nervous and looking forward with trepidation to see if we as a community of lighting and video professionals can instigate change for better working practices within our industry. And that's it from me, folks. Sorry for the stumbles.
Lucy, well done, thank you. Now we're going over to Robbie. Robbie, if you put your union hat on, why do we need a union as well as a professional association? What does one do versus the other?
So I haven't written anything, which maybe I should have. Right, so a union is a very different thing to an association, because a union is an organization that operates within very specific legal parameters. For example, unions have to have, by law, hold elections and that kind of thing. There needs to be certain structures in place, because there's a lot of scrutiny in terms of how a union works, because obviously they are dealing with, they are specifically dealing in collective bargaining and within the parameters of law. Where a trade association is slightly different is that I think a trade association can kind of talk more about how you work and like the craft and that kind of thing, and say, oh, this new Vari light or whatever is it good, is it bad? And you can have all those kind of conversations in that network. Whereas a union is more about legal protection, fighting for you as a worker, rather than championing your own craft, to say. So that's in a nutshell, those are the two very distinct differences between a professional association and a union. So when it comes to people in the lighting industry, we've got two unions, which isn't helpful, but we do. So there's Equity, which is the union for lighting designers. And then there is BEC2, which broadly speaking is the union for technicians. I think I'm right in saying, David or Stuart, you might be able to correct me here, that I don't think that either represent lighting programmers. I think.
That's correct.
Is that right? Yeah?
Yeah.
And they've actually done quite well for themselves without a union, funnily enough.
Like that.
They're quite a niche group of people. So I would argue that now is actually the time to join a union, because what you can do is, while there aren't a lot of you, you know, you could get together and say, right, we want to be represented. We know what people pay, you know, broadly speaking. And if we can just get that in writing, that means that that's broad, like for everybody, that baseline will never fall. And that's how your union can protect you. Whereas if you're an individual, you kind of need to keep, you fight on a one-on-one basis, whereas with a union, you're fighting as a group. So yeah, I'd say the same thing for video designers as well, but there's so few of them. You know, if you get in now, if you unionize now, you can create a decent minimum rate, in theory. So I suppose something to say though, which is kind of where we are, that is common to both equity and BECTU, is that it's very difficult to organize freelancers because you're not in the same building at any one time. I think BECTU do it quite well, where, you know, like they'll have a BECTU dep in a building, say, and if you are part of a building, for example, Glyndebourne or something like that, you know, the crew there will have a designated BECTU contact. Whereas if you are a freelance production electrician, you know, you're moving from venue to venue every week or whatever, and it's harder to kind of pin you down to find you. That's the same issue with equity. Although equity do have deps for casts, because casts are in a building for maybe 2 months at a time, so it's easier. There's a collection of members together at any given point. So that's kind of a big challenge of what we face. Yeah, and there's other things as well. I mean, for example, it's not just about protecting you, say, for example, in disputes or working for your, you know, working with employers to try and better your conditions. It's also about lobbying government, for example, which we've been doing quite a lot of that recently, for many different reasons. And, you know, the work, in theory, like the people working in your unions are professionals at that. You know, we have people who work in Westminster to lobby on our behalf, for example. So that, in a nutshell, is, I suppose, the difference between a professional association such as the ALD and a union.
Robbie,
I don't want to talk too much about that, but if anyone does have any questions, please do pop in, and I'm very happy to shed light on things as best I can. I'm not exactly, well, there's a question here.
thanks, Robbie. Now, look, we're going to have a joint discussion now between Stuart and David about what's the situation at the moment, and why has it got to change? Stuart and David.
Perfect. Thanks, Marco. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. No, afternoon. Blimey, a good way to start. So basically, the understanding is, and I'm not an IR35 expert in any way, but from all the rumours that have been going around and the legislation that has been come out, I know it's been delayed for a year, but it's the way that contracts are formed and staying self-employed are going to change. We're not quite sure of how the details are going to change. So what we decided to do between David and I is we're just going to talk through how a freelance contract is gently put together by just running through some of the key terms that we would. Now, there are lots of other terms that we won't be covering this morning, but the important factor is to start to build a picture of what you require to have as your terms and conditions personally when you agree to do a job. And having been freelance for the length of time that I have, the majority of my jobs have been done over a quick telephone call of, can you turn up? These are the dates. This is what we're going to pay you. See you on Thursday. And I have many a time sat on the train and gone, oh my goodness me, I really genuinely hope that when I arrive at the theatre, it is going to be there, because that's, you know, I've just had one quick call. That is what has to change. And it's changing in legislation, not only through the way that everything changes. So, which is great that the ALD are now formulating at least a bit of guidance, because as we've just said, freelancers do a lot of stuff on their own. Most technicians do not have any form of agent. And the other bizarre part is when you're in a creative role, the contractual side with the producers they tend to fire you a contract. They're prepared to talk about contracts, bits and pieces. When you hit the programmer level, not that that's not as, when you hit a programmer or technician level, you tend to just have a phone call or a chat with someone, or if you're lucky, a quick email giving you the dates and where you're supposed to go. So we're just going to go through the basics of how the contract will be put together, and how now IR35 is going to change that a little bit. So when you get a call, David, we normally start off, the first part we start off with is obviously dates and location.
Yes, where, when is it? Am I available? What are the what are the dates for? Certain things that always ring alarm bells with me as a programmer are if I'm only booked until preview 1, I can kind of know that that's always going to ask at some point to be extended by a few days. Equally, if there's a technical freeze in the process that happens to be a week or two before press night, just as a programmer, you can already foresee that the creative team have got press night in their head as the deadline for them, and not this kind of arbitrary technical freeze date that's probably been set by a production manager to try and keep technical costs down during previews. So, things like that, I'm already kind of going, okay, well, I'll pencil in a few days extra, but then it's that weird thing of I'm doing it out of goodness, and I'm under no obligation to do so. So I think with this whole, with the changes that Stuart's saying about what's coming in with IR35, will mean that because you are contracted until preview 1, and even if you've asked the question of, oh, will I be needed after this? And they say, no, we're not envisaging any changes after preview 1. Well, that's the point where you've got a contract until then. And if you do get offered some other work after that date, that you do take, and then you don't have to feel bad about saying, no, I'm really sorry, I'm not available. When the inevitable question comes on press night, or not on press night, on preview 1 of, oh, any chance you can come in tomorrow or the day after? So it's little things like that hopefully this IR35 process will improve for kind of the freelance programmer, production electrician and technicians out there.
Okay, and one of the big points of IR35 is if you do agree to do a job, if you say, yes, I will do a job, then it is your responsibility to fill that post. And if you are unable to do the job, it's not a question of just phoning up and going, you need to find someone else to cover me. It's then your responsibility as the individual that has been contracted to that post to take over finding that substitute. And the problem with that is that the company have to approve who you decide to substitute. So this becomes a complicated process. So it to a degree will make changing from job to job slightly more tricky, and you will need to find a pool of people to replace the work you're going to do. So that's one of the first key characters of I-35 going forwards. So then we go on to fees and day rates, which is the next part of obviously getting a job together. And this is also going to change, because I think you have to equate how much you're going to need to do the job.
Yes, and I think, because at the minute, when I agree a rate or a day rate for a number of days, on the phone call with the production manager, however far in advance of the production it is, what generally happens is it's the final preview, or it's press night, or it's even after press night, and that's when I'm badgering a production manager to get a purchase order or some form of invoice details so that I can actually get paid. So, I guess at the moment the financial risk is that I've got no details of who the company even are or who I'm doing the work for. And without a payment schedule, because, I appreciate that, lighting designers and, some of the bigger contracts that I do set out a payment schedule where I'll maybe get a third in advance of the contract, a third on the first day that I'm there, and then a third on the day that the show opens, or, something like that. But if you've just done a big show that maybe is, 20 odd days long, then you're potentially then, still chasing that up a month after you finished that job, and you've had no payment for that. So that's also one of the things that IR35 will hopefully improve in being freelance, because we will set a payment schedule will be set out in the terms that you've agreed to.
Perfect. And then obviously you need to work out the amount of hours you're going to do and all that kind of pre-production work and anything else that needs to fill in that scenario. And part of IR35 is you need to supply your own tools and your own work equipment, which to a degree is software and bits and pieces that you need to supply to be able to do your job.
Yeah, I mean, as a programmer, kind of there's the inherent expectation that I will turn up and the lighting desk that I've requested will hopefully be there. But, you know, of course, programmers provide their own laptops and software and all that kind of thing as well. But on the production electrician side, I mean, you know, I think every production electrician I know is wheeling around a Pele case or two behind them full of their own tools. But I guess it's just formalized that you know, they're your property. And this is, I think, where we get into who insures them, and that, you know, the things that you know, in terms of insuring tools while they're on site, is it your responsibility or the producer's responsibility? And the fact that this will all get clarified is only a good thing for when things go missing or things go wrong.
Yeah, and also it does prove that you are a self-employed person, because you are supplying all of that stuff to the production. That's not something that is being given to you. You are bringing all of those tools to you, which is another strong emphasis of IR35. I think I'm not an expert on IR35, I have to confess, but the main bulk of it is the fact that you have to prove that you are self-employed and that you are working for multiple employers. The overall impression I get having talking to employers is the fact that if you can prove that you are working for different people, then you should be fine, and it won't overly affect your day-to-day running. But there are a whole load of steps you need to take to prove that, to carry on being able to invoice for a job rather than being taken onto the payroll of that company. And one of the last things that we're just going to touch on as we're whizzing through a brief look at doing contracts is travel and accommodation.
Yeah, it was in my discussion with Stuart about this a few days ago when I realized just how often I treat in blind faith that the train ticket that I stick on the hotel, on my invoice, will be paid back to me. You know, the amount of times that I'm booking my own travel, and, you know, also kind of, you know, the odd time rocking up and assuming that there'll be a hotel room for me that night. It shows just how much faith there is in the freelance community between, you know, you and the production manager or whoever you've done your negotiating with. And I think that going forward, the fact that this should all be specified and written down, and, you know, it will be agreed what travel is allowed and not allowed. So some companies are already doing that, which is a good thing. So I think going forward, as much as this IR35 thing, to a lot of people who are comfortable in this freelance life of negotiating over one phone call with a production manager, I think the fact that it will all have to be written down and agreed in some way is only going to benefit us all in the long run.
I think that's great. And I think that just to clarify, it's the financial risk, which part of IR35, you have to be seen to be taking some form of financial risk. Train tickets are actually a financial risk because you don't know whether you're going to get them back or not. And also whether you're going to get paid for the contract, which is why you need to get the terms and conditions in there. I think the other small part that is why these documents are so great and how this is all progressing forward is the fact that as an individual, you are talking directly to the person who's doing your deal and not a producer. Normally it's a production manager on a technical side rather than a producer. And if you have a hard negotiation, then I think it then becomes slightly tricky when you get on site.
Yes, I think there's always the point where a lighting designer negotiating through an agent, actually that doesn't muddy the relationship at all between the lighting designer and the rest of the creative team. So you're all in the room as one creative team. Whereas the situations where I've had to push a production manager for a slightly increase in day rate, or most of my the bits I have to push on is insisting on a prep day that I can't show up on day one and not having even looked at a plan or a show file or anything like that. So when you've had to fight for that, you're already seen as a tricky customer in the room. So then when you rock up and you're then the one saying to the production manager, can we make this production desk better? And I know that's a total different kind of worms about production desk conditions that we're not going to open right now. But because you're already seen as a tricky customer, it doesn't get that working relationship off to the best start. So the fact that this will all be written down and agreed in advance and anything will, you know, and I think after companies have done this a couple of times, they will then have their standards, you know, oh, here's the programmer deal memo, here's the production electrician deal memo that we're just going to send out. So hopefully when this becomes a standard thing, then you won't have to be that tricky customer beforehand, so that you can have a good working relationship when you get going as soon as you arrive on site.
It is.
Thanks, guys. Thanks. And I'm seeing in some of the chat, we're trying to follow the chat and the questions that are coming in, that people who work as freelancers are often on their own. And so they do find this business of asking directly to their employer for things a difficult one. I mean, we as lighting designers usually use agents, but we don't always get everything that we want. And we have to agree that we're not going to get certain things. So I think we think that not everything is going to change overnight, but gradually we're going to permeate through the industry where we do get better production desks, where we do get overnight breaks. And we've seen that, for example, on the payment schedule, this is absolutely standard with lighting designers when we get paid. And it isn't standard with other sectors in the lighting world. And I think that can change. Lucy, have you got something to add there?
Yeah, but I've forgotten it instantly.
Okay.
I was just going to say, some producers, of course, are already doing these things. So, you know, we're not being the big bad wolf in all instances. Some producers, of course, are already giving these better terms.
And let's be clear, what we've written is perhaps the dream, and it's for you to select which bits are appropriate to the job you're doing. Not everything fits every job. And you may have specific requirements that aren't even in our checklist. Stuart?
No, I just think I'm just agreeing with you, Marco, to be honest with you. The thing is that if you're on your own and you're new to the industry, or you're just starting and you don't know what people normally talk about in their contract, this information will be there for you to be able to see. I know when I did my first contract, I had to phone people and say, what should I be asking for? What should I put in the thing? What should I talk about? Because it's a world that I didn't have any knowledge of.
Yes, well, that's great. Now, Joe.
And that's the same for the lighting designers as well. I mean, you may have an agent and you may think, oh, I don't need this, but actually every producer sends an agent a different contract. It might depend how busy they are. Sometimes we forget that we should have that small clause in there. And for me, this is a checklist that when the contract comes through to the agent and they say, are you happy with this? I can just whiz through my own checklist and go, yes, everything I would expect to be on this contract is here. Because sometimes when you get asked to sign these contracts, often you're in the middle of a deep, heavy tech session, you just miss certain things, and they may be busy and they miss certain things, or they don't think that producer will push for that, so they don't push for it. And that enables me to say to my agent, come on, you've missed this. This is the second contract you've missed this in. This is an important thing that we want to keep fighting for. So it's for all of us on a lot of different scales.
Thanks. Now, Joe, while you're there, I'm seeing various people asking how they can access these contract checklists and deal memos. Now, we're going to actually launch them tomorrow at the ALD AGM. But what we haven't really agreed yet is how these will be accessible. Currently, I think they're going to be on the members side of the ALD website, which means you need to be a member. But have you got a view on that?
Yes, it's a very interesting question, because we really want to make these documents have meaning. And the more people who use them, the more likely they are to get used. So I think my opinion at this point is that we should all be collaborating together and make these happen. And maybe we'll have them on the non-members side for a certain length of time, because we'd like everybody to see the work that we're doing as well, and that there's a reason to be part of the ALD and to support the actions that the exec members and people who are working for free to make the ALD a better organisation. I think that will also help encourage that.
Thanks, Joe. I'm just going over to Lucy.
I think the producer's guide provides producers with a lot of the things that are in the contract. And the producer's guide, we should have said this, is going to be sent out to as many producers as we can. It's just an information document, but it outlines a lot of the terms and conditions that we're suggesting in the checklists as well. So we need to have a discussion. I noticed that Joe and I contradicted each other on the Q&A board here about whether it was going to be on the members side or the public side. We need to just think about that a little bit harder, I think, and talk about it within the ALD.
Mig, did you want to ask a question? I think you did.
I did. So I just think it would be really useful as a production electrician for you guys to clarify to our 197 people the ALD's membership criteria, because it isn't just an association for lighting designers, it is actually for all lighting technicians. I think that's quite important. And you also accept memberships from video, people as well. So I think it would be cool for you to clarify that.
Joe, would you like to speak on this subject?
I was reading a chat thing, sorry.
No, well, look, I can say...
I'm just gonna interject.
Sure.
Can I just speak there, Marco? Is that okay?
Go for it.
So the ALD, when I joined the ALD as the first professional members rep, when I joined the executive, not the ALD, I should clarify that, that I was the first professional members rep for non-designers, as the organisation welcomed in more people from the non-design element, and it is for working professionals. I know Joe will come in, but basically I just want to emphasize the fact that the technical side of the industry is now being represented as much by the ALD as you know, we are working together to make it a collaborative team of people in lighting, and the criteria is getting wider, and the more of us that start talking to each other, the better it is.
Yeah, I mean, as a lighting association, we all make that work together. We work hand in hand together. You don't have jobs without us, and we can't do our jobs without you, and that's really important. So we have to be a team, and it's always, and when I joined, that was one of the main things I said. I will only take this role if I can really open the doors to everybody who makes this work. I spent 30 years as a head of lighting, so you know, I've sat in that other seat, and I really care about how lonely that can feel without having an association to be part of. So yeah, it's very critical, important to me that the association does open its doors to everybody, and we help everybody.
Joe, I'm just reading on chat, Michael Atkinson, hello Mike, asking if theatre consultants can join. We might have to go away and talk about that, Michael.
We will add anybody
that
with an interest
of things that we should discuss at future.
We absolutely have a category, I think, Robbie, you're saying that, which is called associates. That's for anybody who has an interest in lighting. But Mike, with your background, I think you should definitely be in the ALD.
Absolutely. I mean, we have quite a lot. I mean, we have corporate people, we have people who work for manufacturers. So it's not just about being a designer.
You can, if you work in light as a professional, you can be a professional member.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the big shout out to students. We have a big student cohort, and we have a sponsored student scheme, which means that for part of your student period, you're sponsored by corporate members. Take advantage of that, folks. Now, I'm afraid we're running out of time on our first part. Lots of questions which we will review and find ways of answering them, both through the ABTT and the ALD. Yes, Robbie?
Can I just finish on one point, just going back to what was said a little while ago about, you know, trying to encourage producers to do things like production desks and that kind of thing, and 11-hour overnight breaks. And I don't think I articulated this quite well. Where there's a further difference between an association and a union is that a union, whereas where the ALD can encourage, the union can stipulate, in that the union enters into a legal contract with producers to say you must be in a hotel of no less than 3 stars, or you must have an adequate working production desk and that kind of thing. So yes, the ALD can very much be the good cop in encouraging best practice, but a union is the muscle, if you like. So I think it's really important that we are members of both our professional association and our union. I just wanted to put that out there because I don't think I perhaps made that very clear.
There's one last point that I see from Andrew Stock to all panelists. We need to be open about fees and expectations. And we've countered the equity minimum fees, which annoy some of us because they're so low and not representative of what's really being paid, by having an ALD guide on what is being paid to lighting designers. And there's discussions going on about how open we should be in those other fields. And I think that's an ongoing discussion. But what we certainly don't want to see happening with COVID is, and I'm coming to you, Rob, I'm waiting for the producer to say, well, we can't possibly pay you what we paid before, which was crap in the first place, probably. Rob, hello.
I was just there's something Stuart said, or somebody said earlier, Robbie said it actually, sort of in jest, but it's serious, about the programmers have always done quite well. And I think the key to that with the programmers and the electricians is they've always naturally just talked amongst themselves about how much everybody's getting paid. And they've all been aware that once somebody fights the rate up, if anybody else goes in lower, you're doing everybody else a disservice. And I just think the sort of point to the room we need to be aware of going forward without wanting to be greedy, and while understanding that the producers are about to have a really hard time, is we shouldn't use this to let all our fees get talked back down to where they were 2 years or 5 years or 10 years ago. And the only way of doing that is by basically everybody not being cheap because they need the work. Because as soon as you do that, you've done yourself a disservice in the long term, I think. So we should just keep that in mind a little bit.
Rob, thank you for that. Colleagues on the panel, maybe you can have a look, if I let you off the leash a little bit, at the chat that's going on and answer some of the questions there while I focus in on Rob about LED. So, Rob, I have a love-hate relationship with LED. I mean, I love it when it does what I want it to do, and I hate it when it's crap. And I can't get anything that's close to white. I can have what I call creature of the lagoon green, or sort of pink. Can you lead off there with some comments about the good and the bad?
Yeah, so Marco's just segued into part 2 of this, for anybody who hasn't noticed, so you don't get confused about terms and conditions.
Yes, we're doing LED now, the future of LED.
The future of all of us. Yeah, I think the experience you have reflects the experience a lot of people have had. I think the danger is, it's like anything. If you buy the cheap version of anything, you're going to be dissatisfied with it. Because it's not easy, but it's relatively easy for manufacturers in China who don't care about quality to make cheap LED products and put them on the market. And if you don't need the quality, then, a light that flashes on and off and doesn't fade very well and the colour's terrible, but it does red and blue really nicely, is probably great for a disco. It's probably not so good for using in a sort of dramatic context where you care about the end result. So I think a big part of it is not being cheap. And I think part of that is shopping around. So, the sad thing about the virtual lockdown ABTT trade show, which I think is great in many ways, is you can't actually go sort of try the product. But I think when you do get to try the product, you need to shop around and you need to sort of go into it with a checklist of things you need to look at. Because I'm not knocking any of the salespeople or company reps here, but their job isn't necessarily to show you the things that are wrong with their product. And your job before you give them your money is to make sure you've made sure it does everything you need it to do. So Marco and I were at a shootout at Glyndebourne in January or February, I think, before we all got locked down. And it was interesting how it was an assembled team of professionals and everybody had their little set of tests that they would do by default. And I think the interesting result having us all there is we all got to benefit from everybody's sort of pet thing that they went looking for. So just an example, my ones are, you have this amazing test tool that you always have with you, which is the back of your hand. And if you point the light at your back of your hand and you look dead, probably it's not a very good light. And you should probably start looking at something else. And by dead, I mean flat and you can't see the blood veins and you just feel lifeless. Because the old-fashioned lights that we fight so hard to protect, the tungsten lights, will make you look alive for all kinds of technical reasons. But that's still the difference between the tungsten and the not so good LEDs. The good LEDs are now getting there. And my other big one is not just how it fades, because most of them now fade reasonably well, but it's what happens when they get to 1% and then they go off. Or conversely, they go from off to just on, because that's still where you very often get this. And if the first moment of your show, the most subtly beautiful moment where the light just has to sort of infinitesimally slowly grow out of the darkness and you just see the character appear on stage, if what actually happens is this, followed by this, that's not the same thing. And if you've just spent a lot of money buying those lights and it doesn't do that, but you looked at it, then, I think you're going to have a pretty poor chance of going back and getting your money back. So it's just, it's being careful, because we're all going to be buying this. Well, before this all happened and we had a bit of money, we were all going to be buying this stuff. Quite what happens now, a whole other question. But I think when you start looking, shop with care is like the main message from that.
Thanks for that, Rob. Now, Joe, you love LED, don't you?
I love it. I think it's the
What
best
is it you like?
ever. I just like the whole open Pandora's box of what LED can give you, and that I'm a big fan of using a lot of colour in shows anyway. So I absolutely love the fact that I can constantly be shifting the colour within the space. And I'm not a big red, white and blue sort of person. I'm very much a subtle shifting and giving the audience a slight hint of something uncomfortable happening or something nice happening without them actually knowing. And I love the fact that during a scene you can completely shift that colour in a LED rig that needs a lot harder work to do. On your colour choices have to be a lot more clever. So I've become a little bit lazier in actually experimenting with colour and how it works within a unit, but it does allow me to instantly grab the colour I want. And I also, what I've noticed a lot recently, especially working in the round in a few theatres that have got some very good LED lighting as which can be enough to be used as a good general cover, is that if you're using it with racial casts, I can actually tone the lights in different directions, and as people move around the space, that general cover tones to balance beautifully. And so yes, just the subtlety of playing with the colors and the joy of just having constant movement within your rig. I love it. I wish everybody had LED lighting on everything, but that's my opinion.
Thanks, Joe.
Maybe it's maybe a lazy lighting designer, I don't know.
I think it's a great advantage when we can just move the colour. But I want to go to Rob about colour science. We talked a little bit about this the other day, that we need to understand a bit more about the science that's going on here, don't we, Rob?
I don't think you need to, but I think what LED's revealed is that, I mean, most light designers don't really understand colour science, and most set designers, I have to say, don't really understand it either, because it's always just a thing that's sort of happened. Because you know that you take the model and you take your little birdie or whatever, and you take the swatch book and you play with it until the thing pops or jumps or looks right or is magic or whatever the words you use to describe the visceral reaction is. And then you go, okay, well, that's the colour for this scene, this moment in this show. And every now and again you glance at the little squiggly graph that's on the piece of paper behind it in the swatch book, but I think very rarely do you think about that unless you have a very particular problem you need to solve. I think where it becomes hard with LED is that the decision making is now harder or is delayed, because what Joe's saying is you used to make the decision in advance and then you write down the colour on the piece of paper on the plan, and the electricians cut a piece of plastic and put it in the light, and that's the colour that gets delivered on stage. And now what happens is you might have some ideas of the colours you want to use, but you might admit to yourself that you're free to play, and so you turn up in the theatre and you just go, put that into 201, whatever my favourite colour is, and the programmer does something, and something that maybe looks a bit like 201 appears, and then you get into a heated argument about whether it is actually 201 or not. And then you can tweak it so it doesn't necessarily matter, but by the time you've tweaked it 30 times, you might actually have ended up with a colour that's better than 201. The language of describing what you want to achieve is, I think, quite hard, and I think we're all still learning about. Is it more blue, less red, more green, brighter, dimmer, murkier, cleaner? There's all these words that get used to describe colour that everybody puts a different meaning to. So I think it's a different learning curve. And I think the last part that is going to become really hard that we're just starting to realise is, Roscoe 03 is a really shorthand way of saying, I want this colour. Whereas I need a sort of warmy, reddy with a hint of orange that has a nice feel is not a shorthand anymore. And once you make that colour and it looks great in your whatever product you have, Luster, LED Model A, and you go to the next theatre the next week and they have a different make of light, how do you make sure you get that same colour again? Because you can't just take the piece of colour and stick it in front of the light anymore. And I think that's going to be our really hard challenge for the next 5 years, I would think. So it's not necessarily science, but it's just learning about how colour actually works. In the way of LEDs, where you just have this set of emitters that combine to make a different colour.
One of the things for me as a lighting designer, and I'm sure it's the same also for programmers because they're in the receiving end, is that I want that colour quickly. I haven't got the time to mess around for too long, but we're putting a lot more pressure, new pressures on the programmer in managing this, aren't we?
Yeah, and this, I mean, why these two panels sort of merge together in an interesting way is as soon as you say that, what you're saying is the programmer person needs more time to make sure that they can satisfy your requirements. And to do that, they need more time to have the things set up in advance. And to do that, they should probably be being, I mean, not probably, they should certainly be being paid to do that.
Yes.
So it sort of all ties into that discussion. But I think also we'll start to get maybe different ways of dealing with it. So the example I give, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, Ken Billington, American lighting designer, what he does at the start of every New York season, so once a year, is he goes into the rental shop, he takes all the moving lights or LED lights he thinks he's likely to use that year, and he sits down and he mixes his 30 standard colours or something, and then he writes the numbers down in a spreadsheet. And what that means is when you get employed to do a show for Ken, he doesn't care what console you use necessarily, but you'll get his spreadsheet and you have to get that into the desk. And he'll then call his colours by his colour names, but they're his colours, and he's mixed them and he's matched them, and he will get what he expects. And it's kind of amazing because if you make a typing mistake and you've got a value slightly wrong, he'll notice really quickly, and then we'll figure out what to do it because he's trained his eye in a way to his palette, and that's an interesting way of managing it. The thing that surprised me for a long time is that maybe there's people from them here, but Roscoe and Lee, who are still making these bits of plastic colour, which is surely an industry that must not have a future going forward. I'm surprised they don't reinvent themselves as Pantone. So if you do printing or materials, Pantone is a colour reference standard, and you pay a lot of money to get the Pantone swatch book. But what's then guaranteed is that when you send that colour to the printer, you get that colour coming out of the big giant printing press. So effectively, you're then paying a lot of money for the big swatch book that we all get given for free. And you can see that sort of starting to change in that if you buy, I'm not naming them for bias, but just because they've done it very well, an ETC console and ETC lights, and you have them in their calibrated modes, the console will do a really good job of giving you the color you expect out of an ETC light. We sort of need to figure out a way of extending that across all the lights that we use, so that if I then move to an Ayrton light or a Chauvet light or a Juliet light next week, the same color still comes out of it, and I don't care how. And that happens even if I haven't used Roscoe 03, but I've just mixed some beautiful blue that I happen to love in that moment. That's the hardest thing at the moment.
David, I think you've got something to add here.
I just wanted to kind of make the point to the lighting designers on the panel, and this is coming from someone in the programmer's chair, when it has been fired at me of, oh, why doesn't that lead to a one nook, what good or whatever, is that given where we are with the technology and building on Rob's point that there is no real way of kind of keeping this color you've created and keeping that reference consistent, is should you as a lighting designer with the rig be treating color mixing as important as you would a focus session?
I absolutely agree on that. I mean, I prep, one of the things I do is I prep a color chart before to give to my programmer or the house before I even go into the theatre. So hopefully some of that prep work is done in advance. And I do like to go through all the colours more than move. I actually prefer to do colours to moving light positions these days, because you can always get a light to move roughly in the right place, quickly at the time and fix it. But you don't have the time to do the subtlety of making all the kit work into the same colours. And I have a USB stick like a lot of you programmers do, which has got colours on them already prepared. But then what I find is, of course, they were made in a theatre, and I got 201, was doing what I thought it was doing on the set at the time, and that's my favourite bit of 201. And then I take it to another theatre, and of course it's on a different set, and that 201 doesn't look like the 201 I mixed in the other theatre, because all the other elements are making it look different. And whether that's because the rig is more tungsten with a bit of LED, or more LED, or more art, there's lots of reasons behind that. So to hold on to what we think is a true colour and have any sort of real database is quite difficult, apart from unless somebody does a completely scientific sort of Pantone option, which Rob has suggested. Our eyes will always slightly make a difference. I mean, we all argue about the fact that, you know, a piece of 201 is not always the same bit of 201, and that is because it's come off a different batch roll and can have variations in it. So it's very tricky and time consuming.
The story I tell about this is years ago, because this isn't a new problem. You know, colour mixing in moving lights is the same problem. So on one of the Les Mis years ago, when we first started using moving lights, and we matched all the colours to source falls with gel in the front. And we went somewhere else in the world, and they said, we're going to give you the new version of the same moving light. And we said, yeah, great, fine. Is it the same? Yeah, it's all the same. It's better, but it's the same, which is, you know, you should be aware of that. And we got there, and the colour was just wrong, because everything was just that slightly electric blue, where it's just, you know, it was always a little bit too rock and roll for that show. And it turned out that the better studio colour ran the lamp in a slightly different way, which meant its base colour temperature changed slightly, which meant the other colours were then slightly different. But because we knew our reference, we could then mix everything back. The set designer's version of that story is he went to see a version of the set somewhere, turned up, and it was like the wrong John Napier grey black, and he said, well, this is wrong. And they said, no, it's the sample you sent us. And he said, well, show us the sample. And they produced the sample he'd sent them, which matched the set. So he thought he'd gone insane, but until he produced his sample out of the briefcase and discovered that they'd repainted their sample to match the set, so they could say that they'd done their job properly. You know, there's a bit of that in what we do now, where we can't ever quite get it back to the same thing necessarily. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you find a better colour next week. But, you know, the thing is, once you've found something you like, there's a reason you like it, and you should be able to get back to it.
Rob, I want to pick up on where have we got to? We went through all of this save stage lighting, where the EU wrote a regulation that was totally impractical for us, and that we were going to bin everything, including the latest LEDs. You, Robbie, and many of us fought hard for a change. Now, just bring us up to speed on where we've got to and what is happening in 2021.
Yeah, so fundamentally, I mean, the short version is we sort of won. And that sounds very glib, but I think if we hadn't had that fight, I guess you could call it, we wouldn't have won, and we would have been in trouble, because the EU didn't set out to screw theatre lighting. They just set out to tighten up their regulations, and they neglected to think about a lot of special cases around the edge, of which we were one. The main thing to come out of all of that is that they're now very, very aware of us, slightly nervous about us, and they now keep letting us into the room to have opinions about things. So the short version is, fundamentally, the rules as they're now written, which will come into effect from September 2021, and just to be clear, none of them say you have to stop using anything, but what they say is you won't be able to buy certain things from that point going forward. And we have exemptions for basically almost any tungsten light you want to use in a theatre light. We have exemptions for all of the kind of colour mixing LED stuff that you currently use or could use in the future, because it's sort of exempted on being on the grounds of colour mixing. There was a problem area that was about very high output white LEDs, because they become less efficient. And so they can't meet the efficiency standard. And so that would be a problem for things like, you know, a replacement for a VL3500 or a replacement for a follow spot with an LED in it. We raised that very quickly with the EU, because we put in a text that allowed them, and they changed the text in a way that messed it up. And they've sort of admitted that they did that now. And there was a meeting last week where they've come up with a revised text. It solves the problem. We've proposed a slightly better version of the revised text. They ran out of time in the meeting. They've now asked us to write it down, but I think that problem will be solved. So in terms of legislation, for most things, we're okay. The thing that is the biggest problem that fails, because it's the thing they very deliberately targeted to get rid of, is the M16 birdie lamp and the GU10 240 volt version of the birdie lamp, because they were gunning for those in hotels and houses and restaurants. So we were never going to win that. So I think that, the big problem is if you've got a fringe theatre with a grid of birdies doing your house lights, you need to start thinking about a different way of doing that, or you need to go buy all the bulbs you can now. Either one is actually fine. And that also leaves us to the problem, because the birdie is such an amazing light source because it's teeny tiny and you can hide it anywhere. And you can put LED M16 lamps in them now, but they are all, this horrible fade at the bottom end. So the toughest thing I'm seeing to replace at the moment is actually birdies. And I know various people are working on products that might do that, and some are around and are expensive. Some are not here yet, but promise to be cheaper. So we'll have to see. I think the last point, though, is that the legislation allows all kinds of stuff, but, the manufacturers are already getting out of making tungsten light bulbs at a massive rate, because particularly for our niche world, there just isn't the demand for it. With all in the world, all the small theatres in Britain that all still have patent 23s that are all buying one light bulb a year for them, do not make it worth continuing to make those light bulbs. So I think we'll continue to see the light bulb for the Source 4, because the lamp manufacturers are sort of committed themselves to that. But I think if you're relying on some 30-year-old light bulb for your 50-year-old light, it's a really sad thing to say that you might have to stop using that light, because it's not terribly green to throw that away and replace it with something else. But I think you're going to have to start giving consideration to something else to replace that. Hence the shopping argument.
Now, one question that's come in says, do you know any funding available for venues to upgrade their lighting to LED? We're a charity-run venue with limited funds. Well, the sad thing here, while we're just talking about Europe, was that you certainly could get a grant from Europe to improve your energy efficiency. Well, guess what? We've left Europe. That was great, wasn't it? But any thoughts from the panel on where funding might be available post-COVID? Yeah, there's a bit of head shaking there. I know that all institutions that maybe had money banked for new purchase have probably had that swiped away from them. We're looking at a grim time in how we manage post-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's an interesting big question, because there have been lots of people sitting in COVID lockdown going, oh, the air smells so much cleaner. And, I can see Mount Everest from Kathmandu for the first time in 50 years, which a friend of mine who's a mountaineer says is amazing, because you could never do that normally. The fact that nobody's driving anywhere and factories are shut down means our environment is better. So a lot of the arguments about how you improve the environment have been proven in a completely accidental way. So, there's a bunch of people saying, well, we should have a commitment coming out of this, that if we're going to have to take government money to rebuild things, should we ensure that it's rebuilt in a better way? So there's a bunch of people saying, if we give the airlines money, they should have to commit to developing greener fuels, for example, which is an ideal. At the same time, I happen to know that if you bought an electric car, the government used to give you a grant of £500 to put a home charger in your house to encourage the take-up of greener vehicles. And on the same day that they started giving out all of the money so that we didn't starve, which is an amazing thing that happened, that grant got cut to £350, and that grant will clearly go away soon because there is no money left to spend on it. So the commitment, there's green talk coming from government, but I think the commitment isn't necessarily actually there. Because 2 years ago, as part of this, we were talking about campaigning the Arts Council to get them to understand that they should be helping their funded bodies improve their efficiency. But that would now be at the bottom of their list of priorities, I'm sure.
Thanks, Rob. I'm just seeing on chat that Richard Bunting has said funding from the Carbon Trust might be an option. So that's a possibility. Rob, I want to, Joe, sorry.
I was going to add that I think that some of the funding of the arts will have a carbon footprint added to it, so that there will be a certain amount of responsibility that some funding will go to reducing one's carbon footprint.
Should we, while we're talking about carbon footprint and sustainability, should we call in on how green is LED? And I don't mean that, that comes out of the front of a bad one.
I think the honest answer is nobody really knows in overall, I mean, in overall terms, because the problem is, of course, if you put a 750 watt source 4 next to a, whatever a luster is, 200 watts, say, it's obviously using less power, so therefore it's better. And it becomes even better if you put it in certain colours, because of course with the source 4 you're having the light on at a level and then putting gel in the front and filtering a bunch of light out. Whereas with the luster you're just turning on just enough light in just the right colour to give you just what you need. So, you know, in one of the blues it does very well. A source 4 at 750 watts, the luster might be doing the same thing with 100 watts. So it's much more efficient in terms of power use. Nobody actually knows what those numbers are because, of course, the luster is dimmer than a source 4. So at the same time, you've turned it up brighter. So it's not a direct comparison. There's a project I'm doing at the moment that I think will be in not the next LSI magazine, but the one after. It's very hard to do a comparison across shows of different rigs because every show is different. But what we have right now is 3 versions of Paulie Constable's Les Mis, which was the original, which was sort of pre-LED, moving lights and tungsten, a mid one, which added some LED, and the West End one, which is almost entirely LED plus some moving lights. And what we're doing with that is actually calculating the power each one uses for the same show, lit the same, with the same designer who's gone back in and adjusted all the levels to make it look the same. And it's still not quite science, but it's pretty close. And I think that'll be interesting because you'll see a reduction of power, but I don't think it will be like a 7-fold reduction of power. But you know, it's my project for this week to finish that. The bigger question is the making it and the getting it there and how long it lasts. And genuinely, I don't know, because, you know, if you walk into any theatre, you'll find a source 4, which is probably, you know, the oldest ones are 25 years old now, still working. You'll find a T64 in Chichester, which is still working. All you do is you dust it off and clean it off and put a new light bulb in it every now and again. You know, I don't think, again, who knows, but all the LED lights have got all this control electronic stuff in them, and that's what's going to break. And that's what's going to be really hard to repair or replace or whatever. So do they have a 20-year lifespan? Don't know. Plus, in 10 years, somebody will have a better version that the lighting design panel will be gagging to use for good reason. So then what happens to all these old ones? Now, the benefit of the smaller theatres in normal situations would be if the National started upgrading, all of that stuff would float down into second-hand or donation or whatever. So that, you know, the last problem with COVID is that hand-me-down process is going to get broken again because the National is going to not have money to buy new stuff anymore. Yeah, so we looked at doing a study. Robbie, who did we look at? Who was your friend who was going to, we were trying to get somebody to actually do a proper life cycle study of an LED fixture versus a tungsten fixture, but in the end, actually solving the problem became more important, so we didn't.
I can't remember. I've kind of blocked out that section a few months.
Rob, what we don't know is what happens when we throw the LED in the bin.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't know when you'll have to throw it in the bin, and you don't know what happens when you throw it into the bin. But again, it's electronics and bits and components rather than, you know, a light bulb, which is fundamentally a little bit of metal and glass, which are recyclable, and the source 4 body, which is metal and recyclable, and the lens, which is glass and recyclable. You know, all those old products are actually quite recyclable, whereas anything with electronics in needs a bit more of a specialist approach. And again, I think you'll probably find in the long run the difference between manufacturers who care and have charged you a bit more money in the first place, who might have processes in place to deal with that, and, you know, 199discolights.com on Amazon who doesn't care. You know, so again, it's down to, in its ways, it's you're paying forward to your future self when you do your shopping a little bit, I think.
Also, presumably as part of anybody who manufactures something with an electronic component has a responsibility to its recycling, doesn't it? And that would refer to theatre lights as well.
Yeah, I guess so. But again, if, you know, there's a way of enforcing that with a proper manufacturer versus the guy from China. You know, it's your shopping. So in a way, it's like, again, it's part of what you have to consider when you're paying your money and you're making your choice, I guess.
If I may, I want to move this conversation for a moment off the stage, possibly into the auditorium, into palaces around Europe and elsewhere, churches, restaurants. sometimes I'm really disappointed about the dreary light that comes out of the front of the new, it's an LED, so we're saving so much on energy, but the palace or the auditorium of the theatre, or even the food in the restaurant, I believe, is now looking dreary. CRI, Rob?
Well, yeah, I mean, my other test tool I take if I'm testing LED is a piece of fruit. You know, fruit, you know what it looks like, and if it's, you know, reasonable, it should look healthy and lively. And, you know, if you put it under a bad LED light, the quickest giveaway in the world that there's something wrong with the light source is that your orange or your apple or your lime looks flat and dead and lifeless, and you don't want to eat it. You know, but part of the argument with the EU last year was them saying efficiency rules everything, and us saying, but surely quality of life, for want of a better phrase, must have some value. And it's an interesting problem beyond our world, that the world of people who live in light, which is all of us, don't understand that. In the EU thing last year, there was a bunch of the theatre producers got a bunch of very nice political lobbying people involved to try and help them, who were great but didn't understand light. And in the end, I got bored and said, look, come into the theatre, and we've got, you know, one of every kind of light spanning 30 years. I'll show you. And I literally made them stand there and look at their skin and go, do you feel better in that one? Yes. Do you feel worse in that one? Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Why is that? Well, that's because of this. And what they suddenly realised is they'd start going, oh, right, at home, we've just changed all the lights in the bathroom to LED, and I'd feel a bit weird in the morning. And you go, well, there you go. You know, then what can I tell you? Because the manufacturers don't really, unless you really look in the small print, give you any metric to make a comparison about quality of light. The one you do have is this thing called CRI, which again, in theatre, we've never cared about until, like, I've probably never heard of until the last 2 years. And CRI is sort of a measure of the quality of the light. You know, if you point a higher CRI light at a piece of fruit, the piece of fruit will look better. But by curious coincidence, the light will be more expensive. So you sort of have to make a choice then. So if you're lighting your palace and you need 10,000 lights and the king doesn't have much money, you'll end up with the less good version. And then everyone will wonder why the palace looks dreary. But I think the problem is the public has no understanding or impetus to choose a light based on light quality. And that sort of carries on down to everything. You know, and they're starting to learn they can have fun with light. You know, you can buy your Philips Hue color changing light bulbs that you can control from your phone. You know, everyone can be a programmer now, and they can start to have fun, but it's quite late after you spent all the money on that you go, it's actually harder to read my book under this light than it used to be. And I think we did try and campaign last year to sort of help the lighting manufacturing industry raise awareness of that with the public, but that's all gone away again a bit in the great lockdown, as we'll call it.
I was really disappointed, but curiously working in close succession in Stockholm and Madrid, particularly Madrid. There's glorious Golden Palace, and it was drearily, it had been changed to LED, and my goodness, it was dreary.
I mean, the thing I will say though is that moving light arc lamps are also a dreadful light source. Yeah. And we've dealt with them for years because of the advantage the moving light part gave us. You know, so even a sort of not great LED source is better in some ways than an arc source, because at least it stays consistent over its lifetime. So, you know, yes, we can argue that they're not very good, but also we've been using tools that aren't great for a while. And as long as the advantages outweigh, you know, color changing is the advantage for Joe, for example. You know, that's why you take LED over tungsten now. So like everything we do, it's about balancing your needs and your choices against, you know, budget and what's available, I guess.
I want to just try and pick up on some of the questions that come in because we have a few minutes left. Thomas Roberts is saying, is anyone else having issues with LED output differings on real values of a show in our theatre over a year? Compared Source 4 750 watt versus a Lustre 2 in our front of house positions, and the savings was only €63 per year. Any comments there? And the question I did see was about the variation on colour as lights wear out, LED lights wear out.
Yeah, I mean, I've just had that issue at the bridge last year where I had a set of units that I wanted to hire, and they use a particular hire company, and they only have an X amount of stock. the stock on these sight bands differs between the units, and I was advised not to hire those units to do the job if I needed more than the required number that they could batch check before they went out. And you do go into some of the houses that have had source 4s, for example, for a while, and the colours do mix differently, and it's not all about the setting. It is about buying over certain periods of time, and therefore the batch and the degradation is happened. It's very hard. It is really time consuming when you're hiring a rig. If it's in-house, what I try and plead with the in-house crews is that they do then mix they have colour palettes that are mixed, so that at least we're starting at a set level on all the different kit. But even then, when you individually try and change a colour, the units do slightly change at a different pace within each other. I think there isn't a solution to it, and I think the programmers and the light designers are going to need more time and need more patience in trying to fix these things as we go along. But as Rob said, a lot of people, especially the management we're trying to argue that point with, actually don't understand the different. They can't see the colours. Very few of us are actually got good colour. It's not a norm, and therefore trying to have a conversation with somebody who is slightly colourblind can be really tricky. They just see the world in a different way than we do. But we do our job, and I think we are very attuned to every tone of colour that differs all the time. I mean, I just sit in my office here on my white walls and often just stare blankly at how the light is changing tone ever so subtly, and a lot of people don't look at those things. It's not in their mindsets.
On this subject, earlier on, Richard Owen was asking about whether we should have time to set up the colour on our LEDs. And the answer, Richard, is yes, absolutely. We still need to guard time. It's not just about focusing the generics. We need to set up positions for the movers, set up colours, have private time before we go public.
And you used to do it because you used to have to cut the gel.
Yeah.
Not a new problem. It's just allocated.
And that fits into the, yeah.
And the two subjects join together here on setup time in the programmer's deal checklist. One of the things we're saying is that there's time to set the desk up. And although we're using often the same desk that we were using 10 years ago, it's massively more complex now, because at the other end of it, David, you've got a hell of a lot of different fixtures there. Do you want to talk just briefly about setup time?
Yeah, I think there's definitely two levels of that. There's setup time that I would deem as a kind of a prep day setup time, where actually I'm going to check the fixture profile and that it should work and all that kind of stuff. And then there's actually the setup time, which is more kind of the setup that I need to do in the theatre live with the rig. And inevitably, it's generally over the end of an overrunning fit up with the work lights on, and I've got a stage crew moaning that I'm pointing moving lights in their eyes. So I think, you know, it's all about communication with management and trying to get them to agree and respect that this time is vital, and you can't get it back. Once you've started tech without that setup time, you're always working over yourself or worried you're going to undo something. So it really is vital that kind of that time and that focus time is protected.
Thank you, David. And I have to say our time is up. It's been wonderful talking to you all. I know that we've regretted not really seeing you all in the room, but it has meant that so many people could join from many different places. It's been lovely doing our first thing like this, and let's do more. And thank you to the ABTT. You should belong to the ABTT, the ALD, to Equity where applicable, to BEC, to look at what's going to serve your needs, and come and join us. Lovely to see you all. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. And it's lovely to see so many people here. There are a couple of questions left in the chat panel. If you wouldn't mind just having a little look at them. You've all been absolutely fantastic at avidly answering every single one. So I just hope that you'll join me in saying thank you to the panel. As a lighting practitioner, I found that incredibly insightful, and it was lovely to start in my own discipline across the day of 2 seminars. I just wanted to say thank you to Alicia, my webinar partner in crime.
Yes, thank
she's
you.
floating around in the background. She's an admin guru and she's a social media extraordinaire, and it's been a joy to work with her on these. I'd also like to take the opportunity to publicly thank GSA and the University of Surrey, who have very kindly allowed us to use their very expensive webinar platform to host these sessions, which is fabulous. Today's session, and indeed this series of seminars, have been brought to you by the Association of British Theatre Technicians. I hope you'll all agree that we find ourselves in very strange times and the industry is very much closed. We hope that these events will bring you all back together and gave you a chance to brainstorm and discuss. Our trade organisations more so now than ever need your support. If you'd like to know more about how to join the ABTT as a member, there will be a link that's now been put in the chat, or you can visit the website. I believe Alicia is also going to put the link for the ALD also. There's a wide range of different memberships for both the ALD and the ABTT, so go and have a little look, especially the students. You haven't been forgotten, you have your own section of membership. And I can't express to you enough how being a part of both of these organisations is like joining a family, and you can join in as much as you would like with them. With the ABTT, we also have a donate button in the drop-down menu of our website if you'd like to support the ABTT further. So it just remains me to say thank you very much for joining us today, and we wish you well. We hope to see you all very soon, perhaps not in a Zoom box, perhaps out on site in the future. Thank you very much for coming, and we hope we'll probably see some of you at some of the other sessions. Thank you. So panelists, I will leave this open a little longer because you've got 2 open questions at the moment that you may want to just mop up, if that's okay.
Yes, let's